Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode with the amazing Veena Jetti, and we're going to learn more about multifamily. Thank you so much, Veena, for coming today.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Of course. And one of the questions that we got on social media was about the location, and especially you talked about the population growth. How can you measure how much is going to grow the population in an area?
Yeah, so we look at a couple of different things. We start where everyone really does, which is Google. So we go to google.com, look at the area. We try to see if there's any announcements on any jobs coming to that area. So once I actually bought an asset in Florida and we had put it under contract, and then like 2 weeks later, we heard that there was this project coming up and it had a code name. They wouldn't say what the facility was. And they were like, this new project is coming, it's Project X, and it will be here in the next year, right? And so we were like, oh, this sounds really exciting, but we didn't know what it was. And it ended up being one of like the largest retailers. It was a large furniture retailer, which was great for the asset because obviously it brings jobs, it brings, the population growth, the whole area just flourishes when these large companies move in. So we look for those type. What was the question you asked me? I started talking. How do we look for population growth? That's what you asked. It's like, wait, I know. We look for that kind of job influx. So news headlines will give that to you a lot, which is why Google is really useful. We also do pay for licenses. There's different softwares which will aggregate a bunch of data and it'll tell you what's happening in the area. What the migration pattern is like. You can actually look up migration patterns. You can see where infrastructure is being built. So there's a lot of different ways to get this data. And we kind of take a little bit from each one of these sources and put it together.
Interesting. So how important is migration in this case? Because like, are you only looking at migration within the States or also from people that are coming from other countries?
So typically there's not really a good way for us to necessarily tell where someone from another country is going to end up. Like, are they going to come to San Antonio or Dallas? It's hard to say. But what we really look for is the migration patterns and investments into infrastructure. So for example, we bought an asset in Atlanta or in Charlotte, actually, and that Charlotte asset, we realized that there was $2 billion worth of infrastructure invested in that area, which tells us that the city also sees the population growth, the traffic patterns that are coming in as being a huge logistical issue that they're trying to solve out of the gate. So that's one of the things we look at is traffic patterns, transportation. You can look this up. The Department of Transportation actually releases their migration patterns.
Perfect. That's really cool that you actually rely on some of the resources that the government itself is giving.
Yes.
Interesting. And now, I know that also for like multifamily, the most important thing that you can have is your tenant.
Yes.
So in the case of tenants though, how do you manage that balance between landlord and tenant? Because you don't want to get too friendly, but at the same time, you don't want to get too mean that you're like the awful landlord that nobody wants to see.
So on larger assets, that's actually the beauty of being in 100+ unit asset is you actually have very minimal interaction with your residents. And even on smaller assets, I actually still do this to this day. So whenever I go to visit a property, I always try to talk to our residents, but I never tell them that I'm the owner. So I always say, hey, I work for the management company, or I'm on the management team. Or if I want to be really incognito and I want to get more information, I'll be like, hey, I'm here from insurance. And then I'll ask the questions I want to ask. Because we always secret shop our assets because we want to know what's going on and we want to know what's going on when we're not there. Now, if the manager has been there for a while or they've seen me before, they know who I am when I come on the asset. But if it's a new manager that's there, like we just hired a new regional or leasing manager, I'll go and I'll secret shop and I'll go as a tenant and see what the interaction is like. So we're constantly evaluating how we can be better. And then we give that feedback to our asset manager and then they implement new protocols to adjust for it.
Gotcha. And what are some of the rules or regulations that you have when you're dealing with your tenants or in this case with the managers?
Yeah, so we take all of the rules and regulations very, very seriously. And in COVID, there were a lot of new precautions that came up that didn't exist before, right? And so one thing is fair housing. We want to make sure that we are being equal, we're not discriminating, and that we're being inclusive. That's something that's really important to me personally too. And we address issues right away. We had a leasing agent on one of our assets who made a comment that was a little bit off color, and it is definitely not what our company represents. And we heard about it because a resident complained and told us about it. And when we found out about it at the ownership level, a lot of times these issues don't even make it up to the ownership level, but this did. And so immediately took action, disciplinary action, to make sure that everybody got retrained in sensitivity and understood that, you know, we believe in diversity, we believe in inclusion, we believe diversity is our strength. And so that was something that we really emphasized, and, you know, we had to deal with it appropriately, but we are very big on making sure those initiatives are top of mind for everybody.
And it's really cool that you always take care of all of these different requests from your tenants, even because, like, even if you're the owner, you already have like these many properties and everything, but you still have to listen to them.
Yes.
What are some other software, or like some other techniques that you are using to actually get the feedback from your tenants?
Yeah, so we have, there's different programs you can implement where you can actually do like texting, you can create community. So that's actually one of the most important things of successfully operating, is creating a community, because then you get tenants that are good tenants that want to stay at your asset, and they also bring their other friends who are also good tenants. So one of the things that we do is we'll have little contests. For example, we do a lot of resident events. It keeps our residents connected to the community. They don't really care about me personally as much as they care about their neighbor, which is how it should be, right? So we kind of maintain that distance. Like I said, I never tell anybody that I own the asset. I always tell them I'm on the management team, or I'm here from property management, because I want them to give me honest feedback and feel like they're giving it to somebody who has some authority, without them being like, oh, well, you own it, sit down, let me tell you everything I have to complain about. I did have one asset. It's kind of like an interesting story, definitely the most interesting tenant. I have one asset in Florida, and I had the resident who had lived at this property for like 6 years. So they had it before we even took over the asset. And she found me on Twitter. Yes. And reached out to me. And I don't know how she
was in the FBI, maybe.
She was married to a law enforcement
Okay.
professional, so I think maybe that's
she got the skills ready.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to make any insinuations, but she found me. She like tweets me, and really part of it was she had a lot of frustration with. Actually, it was a very minor issue, but she felt she wasn't being heard. And a lot of times when residents complain, they really just want to be heard, and they want their problem to be addressed, and they want to know you care. And so, you know, I addressed it, and I said, hey, listen, I'm not in the day-to-day, so I'm not going to be the one showing up to like fix your plumbing or repaint your wall, but let me alert staff so that they know that I'm now aware of it, and I want to make sure that this is being taken care of. And I promised her that I would follow up on it personally, and she really appreciated that, and it actually resolved the issue. Because when you have a negative experience, or anybody, not just residents, anybody has a negative experience, I think it's like they say it reaches 27 people, whereas if you have a positive, it only reaches 4 or 9 or something like that. So ultimately, the impact of a negative review is much greater than having a positive interaction. So we really try to curb that.
That's true. And I feel like we all have had an experience when we were living in an apartment complex. And just because of that one tiny little thing that never got solved, we already are like, nope, that apartment complex is the worst. Don't even go there.
And it can be something so simple, right? It's like, okay, the elevator button is broken and no one has fixed it. And it's like, I understand why it's not high on the priority list for owners, but it's something like that small that shows that you care about the residents in the community and the appeal of the community.
That's true. And it also allows your asset to grow. It also allows the community inside there to grow as well. And speaking about growth, is there any way that you can assess how much in the future a certain location is going to improve?
It's hard to assess how much it's going to improve in the area as a whole. We obviously look for the trends and the growth and the infrastructure investment, and that gives us a good indication that this is a growing population and a stable. And we also look backward to make sure it's been stable as well. We want to make sure there wasn't a lot of this happening during uncertain times. But looking forward, it's much harder to predict into the future because COVID, for example, surprised all of us. So what we really try to do is when we're making predictions and assumptions, we try to err on the extreme side of caution. So for example, we utilize AI technology, artificial intelligence, for our rent growth predictions. And let's say it comes out saying, hey, this area is probably going to grow 16% year over year. again, making up numbers for illustrative purposes, but let's say
sure.
it's going to grow 16% year over year, then we might underwrite it to 5% or 8% or whatever that looks like for that asset. So that way, if it grows by 16%, great. We made more money than we thought we were going to, but we're not relying on that to be 100% accurate in order for our models to work out.
So it's kind of like you have like a little room for error.
Yes,
in your
a lot of room for error, not just a little bit.
Like a lot.
Yeah, a lot, and in a lot of different places, because you just never know where there's going to be an adjustment that needs to be made.
That's right.
Pricing of materials and labor have gone up significantly. If you didn't plan for that margin of error, you are going to be in trouble here shortly. So you want to make sure you're erring on the side of caution and being conservative.
And how different was it to do all of these calculations before COVID? And what are some of the new strategies that you implemented after the pandemic?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to debt, so how we're paying for the property, the majority of the note, before we used to leverage to like 75, 80% with no concerns or issues. In today's market, in a rising interest rate environment, we're seeing a lot lower leverage. We just closed an asset that we levered to 66%, for example. So it's a significant difference because it stabilizes the asset more, it de-risks the asset. That's something that's come about, not just pre and post COVID, but in like the last few months, we're starting to see that change. Pre-COVID, we might have underwritten to a 7 basis point per planned year of hold exit cap in addition. So if we go in at a 4 cap, if we're exiting in 5 years, we might underwrite to a 4.35% exit cap. But today, we're now underwriting to like a 10 or even 12 basis point increase per planned year of hold. So that way, as the market adjusts and everything gets repriced, we're prepared for it and we can sustain that in our modeling out of the gate.
Interesting. And now, you mentioned that you're investing in certain markets and you're evaluating them. How do you go about evaluating a market where you don't live in? Because most investors, they usually are like, I'm just going to look at the city right next door. I'm just going to drive 5 minutes and I'm going to see there. So how do you do it?
That's one way to do it. But if you want to really be able to expand and scale, you need to be able to look at multiple markets. I actually always recommend to new investors to narrow the number of markets that they look at. Because a lot of times what you'll see is new investors will be in Phoenix and then San Antonio and then in Boise and then they're in New Mexico all of a sudden and then Florida. And it's like,
to me, right?
How can you manage this effectively? There's no economies of scale in any one area. So we narrow to 7 states that we look at as of right now, and every year we look at expanding that by maybe 1 or 2 or 3 more states, but we study our markets for 12 to 24 months before we even enter them. So start studying your market out of the gate. Then what you want to do is go there, get on a plane, there are planes, go fly to wherever you want to invest, because you need to really understand the dynamic of the local submarket. It can't be, oh, I like Atlanta. Okay, there's different parts of Atlanta. There's Lawrenceville, and there's Marietta, and there's Duluth, and there's Beaufort, and then there's Buckhead. Like, there's all different areas. Which one do you like? And they all have different characteristics, different tenant bases, different opportunities, and different business plans. So you want to make sure you really understand the exact sub-market you're investing into.
And no better way to understand that to actually travel
Get
to
on
that
a
place
plane.
and see it.
Yes.
Interesting. And what are some other ways that you have evaluated in the case of COVID? Because like you couldn't travel. So how did you do it then?
COVID was really tough. So in 2020, we closed 1 deal. The whole year we did 1 deal. And what was actually hard was not closing that deal because it was in Atlanta and my partner, who's actually my sister, is Atlanta based, so she could get in her car and drive. It was super easy. So we got lucky with that one. But we didn't know how to conduct due diligence. Because we walk all of our units before we buy them because we need to know if the ceiling's falling down
and talking
or
to the tenants, doing the feedback and
and there's no way to do that. And then we were like, okay, how do we see the inside of every single unit? And one of the ideas we put forward was maybe we can take a drone through so we can like see if there's any damage, or we didn't know what to do. What we ended up doing was we ended up withholding X amount of dollars per unit that we couldn't go into. And then we held it in escrow. And then 60 days post-close, we had that time to go in and inspect the unit. So there are ways to solve it. You just have to be creative. And yeah, it was definitely hard during COVID to be able to transact in other states. And we couldn't get on planes a lot of times because no one was traveling. So we worked around it. I would have gotten in the car to drive if I had to. Quite honestly, I would have driven 20 hours or whatever it was, because it's so important to me to be hands-on with our assets.
And it also generates a different connection that you would have with the actual asset that you're investing in.
It does.
Any last tips that you could give us if you're looking in a different market?
Yeah, I would say narrow your market, research the market, understand what you even like about it. Do you like it because it's close? Do you like it because you went to college there? Do you think it sounds like a nice location? And then make sure that there are landlord and tenant rules in place that are conducive to your business, and make sure that they fit with what you're trying to do. So for example, if you're trying to raise rent by renovating the unit and beautifying the asset, it's going to be really hard to do that in rent controlled areas. Or if you're trying to add a pool and the zoning doesn't allow for a pool, that's going to be tough. Or if you need an opportunity zone and it's not zoned as an opportunity zone, that's going to be hard. So you want to make sure you understand those nuances before you go into any one location. I like to say narrow it down to like 3 to 5 cities, major cities or metroplexes that you want to be looking at, and understand everything there is about those assets in those areas. So I look at news reports, I'm looking at job reports, I'm looking at economic trends, I'm looking at new permitting. I look to see how many permits are being pulled for new development in any of the markets that we're in. So I'm looking at many different factors. It's not any one thing that we're looking at. So the more is more in this scenario, right? Like more information is better for you. And the more information you have, the better you're gonna be. Also asking realtors, the Chamber of Commerce, developing those relationships are really important, because what happens is they oftentimes find out about the new businesses coming to town first, and they'll be able to kind of give you a heads up ahead of time.
Interesting. And at the same time, if they were to find about your business, by you being communicative with them, they're actually going to have a better idea of what you do and how they can also help you.
That's exactly right.
Versa.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Well, now we know. We got to do our research. Thank you so much to our audience, and thank you so much, Veena. And we are super excited to keep learning more about multifamily. And now you know it. You just got to do your research before you go into a new market. See you in the next episode. Bye-bye.